All right, you guys, we are here with Tobias. And Tobias, say your last name for me.
Aguirre.
Okay, so Tobias Aguirre from Fishwise. So Tobias, we came here today to basically, Brett knows you from CrossFit Edmondson. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, awesome. And CrossFit World and all that stuff. But he suggested that we should come down here today to talk to you about kind of what Fishwise does. But specifically, some questions that I have and Brett has is like, obviously, what is Fishwise? But then also, so on my side, I'm a new dad. He's got a 2-year-old at home. What are things that like families should be looking for when they're going to buy just a piece of fish at the market? What are some things that we can think about in terms of actually helping sustainability of fishing, right, on such a micro level like myself and my family? And then I would say also, like, where do you see Fishwise going in like 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years from there? So those are going to be my questions for you, Brett.
Yeah, and be looking at what is Fishwise, talk about what is sustainable fishing, what's Fishwise also involved in on top of fishing and fishing industry. And talking about ideas and thoughts of other people around the country, or with Paul Watson, what his thoughts on sustainable fishing and things like that. And maybe even talk a little bit about CrossFit. Cool.
Awesome. So Tobias, tell us about yourself. How did you become who you are now and the CEO of Fishwise?
Yeah, it's been a fun but a little bit unexpected journey. My Fishwise story, I think, started back when I was a kid, just having this value that I wanted to contribute back to the world. That's always been a driver for me. And then in grad school, I just finished my first year and wanted to find a cool organization in Santa Cruz that would allow me to apply what I was learning around international relations at UC San Diego.
Okay.
And Fishwise was just starting. My first day on the job was at the kitchen table of one of the founders.
Oh, really?
Wow.
And we just found really quickly through a pilot with New Leaf Community Markets, one of our local natural food stores, that when you give good science-based information to consumers about their seafood choices, that they'll make the more sustainable choice. And they were actually selling more seafood overall. So we were like, oh, there's a win-win-win there. And so I went back to UC San Diego for my second year of school and really focused around sustainable fisheries, but also more importantly, international business strategy, because I really wanted to understand the corporate mindset and what they need to accomplish at the end of the day. Mm-hmm. And if you can bring environmental solutions that also make good business sense, then maybe we can really make change in the industry. So That's what we've been, focusing on for the last 15 years.
That's awesome. So you were at UC San Diego as a sophomore, knowing that this was basically what you were going to do.
Yeah, I was in a grad school, so it was my first and second years of grad school.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
And yeah, it just kind of intrigued me. I've always been, I think, an environmentalist at heart, but also a realist. People are going to buy fish, they're going to sell it, we're going to consume it, so how can we do it more responsibly? Yeah. And if you make solutions for business that make sense, then, that's what we really wanted to dig into and see how do you do that well.
Gotcha. So as we were, kind of doing our research for this interview with you, I was trying to wrap my head around what Fishwise was, and it was like, okay, great. There's sustainability of fisheries. Is that correct? Or fishing in general, trying to figure out a way for us to continue to fish for as long as we possibly can. But you guys seem like you're kind of a middleman. Like your job is to bring a bunch of different people together that all surround fishing in some way and like you said, show them the data. Can you kind of take me a little bit more into what is that process of being able to bring government and your local food market together to understand like what needs to be done to actually keep sustainable fishing?
Yeah, we, I think, sometimes forget that ultimately this is an ocean planet. It's made up of 71%, I think, water. And so as the ocean goes, so goes the overall health of the planet. And seafood in particular is the primary protein for more than 1 billion people every single day around the world. We have the luxury to buy all kinds of different things, but in fishing communities or countries around the world, it's their only source of protein. And, so it's a critical resource along those lines. And, fisheries are complex. When I talk to my friends or others, the answers are complex, and so you have to break it down, into kind of simple ways. But to really have healthy oceans, the consumers play a role, the seafood industry plays a role, and then government, who's in charge of policy and regulation and actually enforcing the laws of the seas, they play a super instrumental role.
Yeah.
And so you can't just focus on one of those.
Yeah, which is what usually a company would do.
Yeah, they would just focus on their sourcing and having a policy and engaging with the companies down their supply chain. But we found, or they found especially, that they didn't have all the answers, and they really wanted to bring in an outside resource like Fishwise, a nonprofit sustainable seafood consultancy, where we do this every single day, and we sort through the complexity and translate it into recommendations and approaches that they can apply.
Wow, that's incredible.
There's a term that gets thrown around a lot, and it's sustainable fishing. And a lot of people say, well, what does that mean? Can you go into a little bit about that, of what is sustainable fishing actually mean for people?
Yeah, so, there's different factors, and we work closely with Monterey Bay Aquarium, their Seafood Watch program, which is just across the bay from us.
Yeah, we're talking about that on the way down.
Yeah, so you have this, internationally recognized institution that I grew up loving as a kid, going to the aquarium. Totally. But they also have a really deep research expertise into the health and the sustainability criteria of both wild capture fisheries, so those that come from the ocean, but then also aquaculture, which now makes up more than half of the seafood produced globally. So super important in itself. But on the wild capture side, we want healthy, abundant populations, similar to not necessarily their historical averages of, what they would have been like before we started fishing, but a way that they can reproduce themselves and the population doesn't go down. And then there's a whole host of different ways that we catch fish, and some are more selective and therefore sustainable. So we're not catching a lot of what's called bycatch, which is seabirds, sea turtles, juvenile fish that we don't necessarily want, but are sometimes swept up in certain
nets or
non-selective methods. And then also what kind of impact are we having in the environment on contact in the seafloor? So if you can reduce all those different impacts, then kind of builds up to a sustainable option.
You said non-selective methods. What does that mean exactly?
So a good example is like a bottom trawl net. Okay. That in many circumstances, but not all, is a really large net that's dragged along the ocean floor, and so it's kind of sweeping up everything that's
whatever's
encountering, and then it gets brought up, and the workers on board are hopefully being able to sort through, and you isolate the target catch versus the bycatch. But the bycatch is often thrown overboard, either dead or dying, and wasted. A well-regulated fishery would keep that bottom trawl net a little bit up off the ground so it's not scraping the floor, and then also putting limits on the amount of bycatch that they can catch.
Gotcha.
So there are circumstances where a bottom trawl could be a little bit more sustainable.
Okay, gotcha. You mentioned that you're a nonprofit. What made you guys go in that direction, and why not make money off this thing? Yeah, so
it's a little bit of a misnomer in a way. So our IRS determination, we're a 501c3. At our heart, we're an ocean conservation group. But we also style ourselves as a consultancy. So, when we engage with business partners and we work with some of the largest retailers in the world, like Albertsons companies, they have over 2,000 stores around the country, buy hundreds of millions of pounds of seafood. Target, who everyone knows. They're used to engaging with business, kind of business to business. And so we really try to bring some of the international business training that I had, back at UCSD into it. And we have a scope of work and a kind of a targeted action plan. And that's a language and a way of engaging that they're used to. And we find we can make good progress with them that way.
So do you find coming at them as a nonprofit, they're more likely to listen? Or maybe be more open to ideas with you, or?
It really depends.
Yeah.
There's
because I could see like some companies, maybe like a local, market here, you come to them, hey, we're a nonprofit. This is what we do. Here's, and they might be wanting to listen, but Target, I'd imagine they'd be like, you're not even on my list of people I'm going to talk to.
Yeah, it does really depend. There's some salty characters out there in the seafood industry that are, why would I ever deal with an environmental group?
Yeah.
But then we're like, well, we understand, what you're trying to get to, and let's figure out how we might get there together.
Which is money.
Yeah. They want to sell fish at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And we want a healthy, abundant, seafood industry and resilient oceans. And so I think we have that same vision.
Yeah, exactly.
And you can actually be more productive if the oceans are well managed. Something like $50 billion of potential can be unlocked if we actually take good, care of the oceans.
Really? Can you explain that a little bit more? Like how does $50 billion come out of an industry that everybody really looks at from the outside in and goes, well, it's dying?
Yeah. So it goes back to some of that waste that I was describing, where, there's all this unwanted catch. If you actually are more selective, then the fisheries can rebound. There's more fish to catch overall, and then it just grows the overall seafood market.
Sounds like more work.
Yeah, and there's a lot of work, and sometimes we're disassociated from the work that goes into our food. But we should value that, and sometimes it should be priced accordingly. So we're paying the real cost of our food.
Yeah.
In fish, a lot of the impacts are externalized out into the environment. But we have to bring that back in, and sometimes it means paying $1 more. But sustainable options aren't always more expensive.
Yeah, I would say that's like one of my big questions I have, and this was actually something I want to ask later on, but this is perfect time. Is that when you go to a grocery store and your dad or mom or a normal guy or girl going to buy some fish, you look at this fish, you look at this fish, and you go, that one's $4.99 a pound, and this one's $8.99 a pound. Okay, I'll take the $4.99 a pound. They look exactly the same. Mm-hmm. I don't see any difference. You'll even see things on the front label like Atlantic salmon, for example, and then the next one will say like wild caught Alaskan salmon. What is something that people should be looking for when they go to the grocery store and they're about, they've got this fish and this fish, and the prices is obviously much different. Mm-hmm. But what are some easy things that people can look for to make sure that they're helping out? Obviously, like what you guys are trying to do, contain sustainable fishing or make sustainable fishing something that hopefully happens in the future, and then also not be giving their kids or whoever else something that's bad for them to eat.
Yeah, totally. There's some great tools out there to kind of cut through the noise and the complexity. Okay. So for consumers, the Seafood Watch app, which is on both iPhones and Android, is a super easy way to kind of scroll through and identify what the more sustainable options are.
It's called Seafood app?
Yeah, Seafood Watch app.
Watch app.
Yeah,
okay.
So you can go to the app store and download it. It's probably been downloaded tens of millions of times. So that gives you some power in your hand.
Awesome.
But our approach, though we utilize a lot of that science, is to work with retailers and help them progress all of their seafood to sustainable options, so that when you go to that seafood case, it's not so confusing, and you can just have total confidence.
Mm-hmm. But that's not happening.
Well, no, there's some amazing Target. They're not often thought of for their seafood option, but they hit 100%. Responsibly sourced seafood. It was one of our big projects that concluded in 2015, and they have wild salmon, tilapia, shrimp.
Really? So people should be going to Target to buy their seafood.
Yeah.
What the? I would never in the world. Yeah. If somebody my wife said, hey, I'm going to Target to buy seafood, I would have been like, you're crazy. What are you doing?
Frozen?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's another interesting misnomer sometimes, is the thought that fresh is always better than frozen seafood. The technology has really progressed. And so say Alaskan salmon fisheries, they might catch the fish that day, process it on board, flash freeze it. And so it's in this pristine state.
It's been locked in.
Yeah, it's been locked in. And then if you know how to prepare it, which isn't particularly complicated, then you have essentially a fish that was caught just a moment before. Yeah.
Wow.
But then on the fresh side, sometimes it's amazing and fresh. Sometimes it's been in the supply chain for 5 or 7 or 10 days, and it's not frozen, but it's not nearly as fresh. So frozen options can be, both sustainable. They are often less expensive. They're easier, less expensive to transport because you're not air freighting it. So then there's less carbon impacts with frozen seafood often as well.
Wow. Yeah, that was one thing we went into when we were looking at just regular grocery shopping and stuff. I remember was that we were talking about buying frozen vegetables over regular vegetables sometimes is a better case for you. So, wow, that's something I didn't know.
Now, is farming fish, like farm salmon and things like that, is that also part of the sustainability option is that you guys promote?
Yeah, absolutely. So we import about 92% of our seafood into the U.S.
92%?
Yeah. So even though we have, big fisheries, Alaska, the Gulf of Mexico, we're bringing seafood in from all around the world. And a lot of that is aquaculture or farm fish. Okay. And often consumers think that farmed seafood is inherently bad.
Yeah, that's my usual.
Yeah.
But it can be farmed sustainably. And so some great options are, trout, catfish. A lot of our trout in the U.S. is farmed in Idaho in pristine, beautiful water that's coming from the Rockies. So it's, in particular, if they're in contained systems where we're treating any waste, you're controlling exactly what kind of feed that they're getting, and they're not at risk of escaping out into the environment and interbreeding with native stocks. So, when I was in New Zealand, we visited a salmon farm called Mount Cook Aquaculture or Mount Cook Alpine Salmon, and they're in these canals that the water runs out through these great huge reservoirs, and that water comes from like the Southern Alps in New Zealand. So it's like pristine water. They're swimming upstream constantly, but they can't escape anywhere, and they're fed a sustainable feed. And so it's, in my mind, some of the most sustainable farm salmon in the world. Wow. Which a lot of environmentalists and others would say, you could never have a sustainable farm salmon.
That's usually what I've heard.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. And you said that there's an issue with them escaping and actually breeding with wild fish. Why is that an issue exactly? What would that cause?
Yeah. Well, sometimes the farm fish will outcompete native populations. So they're kind of designed to grow really quickly. And sometimes, like with tilapia in particular, they're considered an invasive species when they get out in the environment.
Oh, wow.
Because they just propagate like crazy, and they'll outcompete everything in their natural environment.
Just eat everything that those other fish are trying to eat.
Yeah, pretty much.
Wow. I didn't even think about this stuff. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Heck yeah.
You mentioned before a lot of our fish comes from outside the U.S. Is there a certain area of the world that produces more fish than any other country or region?
Yeah, some of the bigger producing nations are Thailand, Norway, Iceland, the EU, all along their fisheries. It's a big, diverse, beautiful world out there.
Sure.
in terms of seafood.
Now, does Fishwise impact those fisheries as well? I mean, I know you're talking about local chains and everything. Target, you mentioned Target and Albertsons. I know Hy-Vee is also one of your main ones. When you talk about other fisheries, do you also go internationally and try to impact the way those fisheries catch and do their catch as well?
Yeah, absolutely. One of our main approaches is to work and really cultivate leaders within the seafood industry. And so that's some of those big buyers, those big retailers, that their networks reach around the world. And so they can either be a champion for good or have destructive impacts. And so we really want to build their leverage and give them the tools to source responsibly. And, our data team collects all that data from their suppliers and analyzes it. And, they're buying seafood from 10, 20, 30 different countries. And for us to really be a full solution for them to help them understand their seafood, we have to have expertise in all those fisheries and farming products from around the world.
That's awesome.
Now, you said that you guys are collecting data. Can you dive a little deeper into that? Like, what's the stuff you're giving to these companies to show them that you can help them?
Yeah, so, we also want to partner with their suppliers and help them become part of the solution. And so they do a lot of hard work on their end, understanding what they are bringing into their customers. So we need to understand where the seafood is caught or farmed, what region, how it was caught or farmed. Mm-hmm. And then that goes into some of the analysis, and we can prioritize for them, your top 20 seafood products and their sustainability status and how far we have to go and what we're going to do. So Albertsons made a top 20 by 2022 commitment. So we're working with them to focus on those top 20, which captures most of their seafood volume that's sold in their stores, to help it all be responsibly sourced by 2022.
With top 20, explain that a little bit more for me.
So it goes to like their highest volume. So
of actual type of fish sold. Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. So we all probably eat a lot of tuna, shrimp, salmon, catfish, tilapia. Those are like the 5 most consumed seafood in the country.
That's what I was asking. 20 seems like a lot. Like I think when I go to the grocery store, I see maybe like 3 or 4 different types of fish actually in there. And is there actually 20 different types of fish that are in a normal supermarket?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, totally. We love our choice.
Yeah.
And things come and go.
And you're talking about
seasonally.
also, not just talking about fresh fish, you're talking about fresh and frozen at the same time. So it's not just like the normal meat counter. You walk in, it's like, okay, we got salmon, we got tilapia, halibut, and rockfish or whatever. We're talking also including all the frozen options as well, correct?
Yeah. Seafood sprinkled all throughout the store, and there's a shelf stable category, which is all the canned tuna, canned salmon, oysters, clams, sardines. Gotcha. And sardines are an awesome option because they're abundant, low on the food chain, have all the rich omega fatty acids and stuff that CrossFitters need to stay healthy and get some of that the healthy fats that we want.
So every time somebody says sardines, I freak out because I used to be on a wildland crew, and this one guy brought sardines in his backpack, and one time it got too hot and it burst open, and we were stuck out there for 2 weeks. Oh my god! And all we smelled the whole time was fish, and we were so pissed at him.
That'll ruin it for you.
So you go into the grocery store and you have all these different options, right? Farm raised versus wild caught versus Atlantic salmon, and you're saying that it's not necessarily about if it's farm raised or if it's wild caught or if it's caught in Alaska, deep sea, whatever.
Yeah. What
is it really about? Like, what is it that we should be looking for specifically?
Yeah. So the way that I approach it is use the app. That's like something we can do, but also look a little bit into where your food comes from. And so most grocery retailers these days will have a sustainable seafood policy, and you can go on their website, see what it says, educate yourself a little bit. So that's why some of the partners that we work with, they have real robust approaches. I like to sometimes just focus on stuff that I know is good. So wild salmon, trout, sardines, catfish, halibut. Pretty much anything that is caught or farmed in the U.S. is going to be in good shape. We have some of the best fisheries and aquaculture management in the world, and it wasn't always that way.
Yeah, for sure. What I think one of the big stigmas that I hear about, like with farm fish, especially from the CrossFit community, is that they're grain fed. Is that true across the board? Is that how does farming fish actually work?
Yeah, there is a lot of soy in feeds. So there's different methods. Some fish are grown in the ocean in nets or pens.
Okay.
That's inherently kind of more challenged from an environmental perspective because you have the water kind of freely flowing back and forth, and if one fish gets sick, it can spread it to the rest of them, and then you need to treat it with antibiotics. Would be an example. That's one of the challenges with farm salmon in Chile. They have a big antibiotic issue there. So that's in the kind of the open, uncontained systems. But then you can have ponds or tanks on land, and then you can really control the inputs and outputs. And, fair enough, some people that may rub you the wrong way, the thought of raising fish in tanks. But it can be a really sustainable, healthy seafood option.
So I think for me, it's not necessarily the fact if it's raised in a tank or in the ocean or anything like that. It's like what these fish are being fed.
Yeah.
And then what I'm eating that fish was fed. The same way it's like a grass-fed cow versus a grain-fed cow. Like I'm going to go for the grass-fed cow.
Yeah.
Is it law that they have to list or something on some of the packages showing what they actually fed that fish, or no?
It's not, and that's one of the less transparent areas within the industry.
Because it's simple. You see a grass-fed and grass-finished beef.
Yeah.
Cool, go for that.
Yeah.
Versus like doesn't say anything. Okay, it was a grain-fed probably cow, so I'm going to stay away from that. Like obviously, most of our listeners are probably CrossFitters and paleo-ish type people.
Yeah.
Would you say it's a better option? Just look for wild caught.
I can't.
Really?
Yeah, it does depend. I eat farm seafood all the time. I just kind of know what to look for through some of the tips I've been trying to share today.
Yeah.
But the industry has come a long way. Previously, we were catching a lot of small fish, grinding it up into fish meal and fish oil, and that's through the little pellets. That's what's then fed, to farm fish. Mm-hmm. But now they're coming up with some alternatives, different kinds of proteins and fats to replace that ocean protein. So, previously you might have a species where it takes 3 pounds of wild fish to make 1 pound of farm fish. Mm-hmm. Now there's some that are kind of 1-to-1. They're becoming a lot more efficient.
But the main goal, you say, is use that seafood app to figure out what fish you should be buying in the stores.
Yeah, and also, when you're at a restaurant or at the seafood counter, ask some questions.
Okay.
How do I know that this is responsibly sourced or not? Do you guys have a policy? What kind of care and thought is the restaurant putting into it? And they should be in a position to answer those kind of questions. And if they don't have that information, a light should go off in their head, like we need to pay a little bit more attention and have intentional sourcing of our seafood.
And what are some of the answers that you're looking for from that, general manager or whoever you're talking to at the restaurant?
Yeah, I mean, some of the less impactful fishery or techniques are, trolling. A lot of our salmon is caught, and albacore off the West Coast, they're caught by trolling as opposed to trawling.
Okay.
So this is complicated stuff sometimes.
Yeah. What's the difference between trolling and trawling?
Yeah. So trolling would be a boat that is trolling or kind of pulling individual lines and hooks behind it.
Oh, okay.
And so, like if a albacore bites that hook, they can pull that line in, look at it, say, okay, sweet, we caught an albacore. But if it was something that fisherman didn't want, they can unhook it, throw it back, and that fish will survive.
Okay.
As opposed to like a long line, which could be 50 miles of hooks, and they don't go back to it for 3 days.
That's trawling.
So that's actually long line. Okay. Trawling is the net that I was describing earlier, where you pull a big net and it's kind of catching everything that it encounters.
Okay, so one more time. Trawling is a smaller line.
Yeah.
Right? And
single hook.
They're actually able to see what it is right then and there versus
trawling.
Those ones just sound alike, but they're really different methods.
Yeah.
Trawling is the huge net.
And so a huge net, you would have it would just be sweeping the bottom of the ocean, pulling up whatever is pulling up with it. Okay, cool.
And then long lines are the long, like you said, 50 miles of line with several hooks, and they put buoys out there to market.
Yeah.
And then they leave it for a few days, come back, pull it up.
Yeah.
And we got fish, but we also got a turtle, we got a dolphin, we got a shark, we got all this other stuff we don't need or we're not really wanting, but it's what happened. It's when
another good kind of shortcut is 1-by-1 fisheries, which is like pole and line or hand line. So a lot of the tuna, canned tuna out in the world, comes from fisheries where it's a big boat and it's a whole bunch of guys, and they literally have a pole and line, and they're throwing it in and they're hooking fish, and it's one by one.
Damn.
And so anything that and these guys are strong. Like I would challenge many a CrossFitter to get out on a pulling line vessel.
12 to 18 hours a day, probably trying to get as many fish as they can.
Yeah. So if you like Google a video like pulling line fishing Philippines, it's these crazy videos of they are just bringing them in one after another.
Oh my gosh.
But but they're employing a lot of people, so it's providing a lot of livelihoods and jobs in those communities.
And saving a lot of other fish. And
super selective.
Wow.
I want to go back. We were talking about the different methods of fishing and everything when we talk about long lines. A couple of weeks ago, I was in San Francisco and caught a Sea Shepherd documentary premiere. It was about chasing the Thunder, which was apparently this notorious illegal fishing boat that was using long lines. And they would drop these lines in, and then Sea Shepherd would catch them and pull these lines in. And literally, they would catch, hundreds of miles of fishing line that were bringing in and all this on the dead fish and everything. After the film, Paul Watson came up on the stage. He's the founder of Sea Shepherd, and he was talking about doing Q&A, and someone mentioned about sustainable fishing, and he had an interesting comment where he said there's no such thing as sustainable fishing anymore. I don't know, what are your thoughts on that? What is Fishwise's?
I would have to, I think, get into a good conversation with him about that and dig into that. It might come from a slightly different worldview,
okay.
One that I do respect, but I think I operate from the place that millions of people are fishing every single day. And so we can either have greater impact or less impact. Right. And I do think that fisheries can be well managed, through some of those ways that I described. But, we have the luxury of not eating fish. We can go and eat our other lean meats and our nuts and seeds and all that good stuff. But a lot of communities, they don't have that choice. There will be hopefully fish on their family's plate in communities, island nations around the world every single day. And so if we don't find a way to do it responsibly, then they literally don't have food to eat. So that's kind of, through one of the lenses that I see this work.
Yeah, it's like we have a kind of like a blind view of this. And I mean, I think you would be hard caught, at least where we're at in Gilroy, California, to find people that eat fish more than once a month. Mm-hmm. Really. And maybe that's even when they go get sushi or something like that. You know, like they're not eating fish every day at every meal or anything. So it doesn't bother us as much, I think, to like worry about farm raised versus this or sustainable versus that. And you're saying that this could literally wipe out countries.
Yeah, I mean, it would have it does have a real impact on, less developed countries around the world. Our ultimate vision of sustainability is a seafood industry that makes a meaningful contribution to not only resilient oceans, but also livelihoods of people that depend on them. There's fair labor. Labor is a whole nother issue in terms of some challenges, where companies are not doing it the right way. But it's a more holistic vision where, the people and the fish matter just as much.
Yeah. And can you dive into that a little more? You kind of talked about that before we actually went on air about that and saying you guys are actually starting to work more on the livelihood of people who are out there on these boats and fishing. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so we started out our organization around 2002 just looking out at the Monterey Bay, which is literally right over there. Pretty lucky.
Yeah.
And, just wanting, to have healthy oceans because, we surf, we dive, we swim, and just love the ocean and want it there for our kids. And so we've been working on the environmental side of things, for our first 10 years. But around 2014, some investigative journalists and some NGOs that we work with started to reveal some of the labor practices that are going on around the world, with kind of a hotspot in Thailand where, workers are being trafficked from places like Myanmar and Cambodia into Thailand because the Thais don't want to work on fishing vessels. It's dirty, hard, super dangerous work. And so they would be trafficked out onto boats and literally enslaved. And, it could be out at sea for 3-5 years. And the industry has to do it that way because they've kind of ruined the fisheries. And so any way to squeeze out a profit is to not pay their workers. And so we saw that challenge, big exposés in The Guardian and others, and decided that we really need to tackle that issue as well. And so now we're working on a big project, a sustainability roadmap for the seafood industry, because a big grocery retailer, they don't want modern day slavery or forced labor in their supply chains, of course.
Yeah, that's a death star.
Yeah, your shareholders see that, and you're going to take a big hit.
Yeah.
So we're putting together a roadmap for the seafood industry that will launch in March that shows them in kind of step-by-step ways how they can protect workers in their supply chains and ensure that they have their documentation, they're getting breaks, some of those basics that we take for granted but aren't necessarily a given in other places in the world.
Is there a way for us to know, like you said, do your research on the companies of the food that you're buying from? Is there a way for us to dig deep enough to find out that these companies are doing these types of things, or is that pretty much under shadow?
It's hard to see because it's in the shadows and the corners of the world.
Yeah.
It's
because obviously, if you tell somebody that, hey, don't buy from this company because this is what they're doing to their labor, people are like, cool, got it.
Yeah, and our approach is a continuous improvement, and so we don't want consumers to boycott companies, or we don't want a grocery retailer to necessarily stop buying from that supplier unless they really show that they're not going to engage and try to improve. Because as soon as you stop buying from them, they'll sell to China or some other market that has less progressive policies, and you lose that opportunity to engage with them.
But at least they're coming into this company that's trying to make change,
Yeah.
and then hopefully over time that will happen, is what you're saying?
Yeah. And one great thing that consumers can look for is fair trade certified seafood.
Okay.
We're used to that in coffee and bananas and chocolate and all that.
Yeah.
But maybe 5 years ago now, fair trade came into seafood, starting with tuna from Indonesia. And now they're expanding into a lot of other seafood options. And so, those are great stories where the communities organize. They go through democratic processes to decide, what their community needs. Mm-hmm. And then when you buy fair trade seafood, a premium goes back to that community. Very cool. They can invest it in schools or libraries, or even just safety equipment on the boat. So, so the communities know that their fathers and uncles are going to come home at the end of the fishing day.
That's awesome.
I like how you talked about before when you talk about the working with Target or whoever else, and if they're using a supplier that is not showing the best practices, you're not telling them don't use them anymore, because now you're actually working not only with Target, but now you're also working with that fishery, trying to make them improve. Yeah. So you're not just cutting it off and trying to say we're not going to associate with you. You're going to continue doing that. No, we're going to try to work with you and try to make you fish in a better, doing better practices and everything. Exactly. That's pretty awesome.
Yeah. It takes engagement through this whole complicated line of companies to get down to the source of, where the practices are occurring. And we don't do that all our own. We work with NGOs around the world. We have a lot of partners. One of my big projects over the last 10 years has been to bring all the environmental groups together in North America and Europe into something called the Conservation Alliance for Seafood Solutions. And so that's a big alliance of about 41 organizations that we all work together through some common guidance to the seafood industry to show them that this is achievable, and here's the different steps through a common vision that we created. And that really has created a lot of consistency and clarity so that the industry is willing to start to work on things.
Wow, that's amazing. It sounds like a lot of work, too.
No kidding.
Yeah, I have kind of a superhuman capacity for meetings and trying to find consensus amongst people.
I was going to say, well, thank you for taking a little bit of time to do this with us, as this is probably eating away from a lot of time.
Oh, no, I enjoy it. Like, we want to, do a better job of telling our story out in the world. We've been kind of heads down, just working to improve things with the companies that we work with. But we do a lot of good work. And so, thanks for inviting me.
Definitely.
And get to share our story a little bit.
Definitely. Last question for you. Where do you see Fishwise in 5, 10, 15 years from now? What's the goal?
Yeah, we want to continue to go global. We started, like I said, in one little office here in Santa Cruz. One of our big projects now is a USAID-funded project. We're creating the Seafood Alliance for Legality and Traceability. And so that is bringing in governments. So we're working with the U.S. government, Japan, the EU, others, to really all come together to try to stamp out illegal fishing through the practice of traceability. So a lot of your questions are around well, how do we know? And
totally.
So if you don't have traceability, if you don't know where your seafood is coming from, then it all kind of falls apart. It's one of those, underpinning systems that we need in place that's not really there. And so that really takes a global effort. And so that's what we're pulling together.
So that's where Fishwise is heading right now.
Yeah, that's
awesome.
One of our big projects.
Is there anything any of our listeners or that we can do to help out Fishwise?
Yeah, it's the small, I think, daily choices. Especially the CrossFit community, we all really care about what we're putting into our bodies.
Yeah, totally.
We're getting our sleep, we're getting our WODs in. When we're buying, lean chicken breast, pay a little bit of attention to your seafood choices too.
Yeah.
Go to that grocery retailer, see if they have a sustainable seafood sourcing policy. Use the Seafood Watch app, and just ask some questions. And if you do those things, you'll be doing your part. And the message is definitely don't shy away from seafood. Like, I work on it every day. We eat it a couple days a week. My kids love wild salmon from Alaska. They can't get enough of it. So my message is be engaged and put a little effort in, which CrossFitters are used to.
Yeah, you're not going to have a problem with that. That's for sure. I'm sure that everybody's already doing research on this right now, trying to figure it out. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tobias. We really appreciate you taking the time to sit down with us. And I know you guys got a lot to do here.
Yeah, for sure.
It's also your birthday today, so happy birthday.
Yeah, it's my birthday. Yeah, and we're also celebrating Fishwise's 15th anniversary today. So we're going to have a big public event down here at Seabright in Santa Cruz and welcome the community to learn a little bit more of what we're doing. And if you're interested, just go to our website, which is fishwise.org, and we've got all kinds of cool content there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tobias.
Cool.
All right. Thanks, you guys.
Yeah.